The scream of twisting metal was the only dinner bell the boy had heard all day, but it wasn't food that called to him from the churning gray river. It was a life. Finn was huddled beneath the skeletal remains of an old fishing pier, a thin, threadbare blanket pulled tight around his shoulders. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, turning the forgotten stretch of industrial wasteland he called home into a miserable swamp of mud and despair. The river, swollen and angry, clawed at its banks, its current a murky, violent torrent. He was watching the bridge, as he often did, a ribbon of concrete and steel connecting a world he couldn't touch. Headlights blurred into streaks of white and red, each one a tiny capsule of warmth and safety speeding away from him. Then, a blue sedan, moving too fast for the slick conditions, hydroplaned. It spun in a sickening, graceful arc, a dance of impending doom. It struck the guardrail, which buckled and snapped with a sound like a giant's breaking bone. The car hung there for a heartbeat, a fragile ornament on the edge of oblivion, before it pitched forward and plunged into the river. The splash was a deafening roar that swallowed the sound of the rain. For a moment, there was only the river, its surface broken by the fading ripples of the car's entry. Finn's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady hiss of the downpour. He was just a boy, 14 years old, but looking 12, all sharp angles and hollow cheeks, invisible to the world. His first instinct, born of 1,000 nights spent avoiding trouble, was to stay hidden, to see nothing, hear nothing. Getting involved meant cops, questions, and the dreaded, sterile chill of social services. It meant being seen. But then a muffled cry reached him, a sound of pure terror that cut through the noise of the storm. He saw a head break the surface near the sinking car. A woman. Her arms thrashed wildly, her face a pale mask of panic as the current began to drag her away from the vehicle and pull her downstream, toward the treacherous pilings of his pier. Something inside Finn, a deeply buried ember of humanity that the streets hadn't yet extinguished, flared to life. He remembered his own mother, her face fading in his memory, but her voice still a whisper in his ear. "You do the right thing, Finnegan. Always." He scrambled out from under the pier, the cold rain instantly soaking his thin jacket. His sneakers, worn through at the soles, squelched in the mud. He ran along the bank, his eyes locked on the woman. She was struggling, coughing up water, her movements growing weaker. The car was gone, swallowed completely by the brown water. No one else had stopped. No one else had seen. He was it. He was her only chance. "Hey!" he yelled, his voice thin and reedy against the wind. "Over here. Swim to the bank." She didn't seem to hear him. The current was too strong, pulling her into the center of the channel. Finn's mind raced. He couldn't go in after her. The river would take them both. He looked around wildly, his gaze landing on a thick, half-rotten rope tied to one of the pier's support beams, left behind by fishermen long ago. He tugged on it. It was stiff and heavy, but it held. He frantically worked at the knot, his fingers numb and clumsy with cold. The knot was a solid, swollen fist of hemp. He cursed, tears of frustration mixing with the rain on his face. He pulled a small, rusty pocket knife from his jeans, his only real possession, and sawed at the rope. The blade was dull, but it bit into the fibers. One by one, they snapped. The rope came free just as the woman was being swept toward the first of the concrete pilings. A direct impact would kill her. "I'm throwing a rope," he screamed, his voice raw. He coiled it as best he could and hurled it with all his might. It fell short. He hauled it back in, his small frame straining, mud sucking at his feet. He took 3 running steps and threw again, putting his entire body into the motion. This time, the rope landed just ahead of her. Her hand, pale and limp, brushed against it. "Grab it," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Please grab it." For a terrifying second, she didn't respond. Then, as if his voice had finally pierced her panic, her fingers curled around the rope. A jolt went up Finn's arm as her weight caught. He dug his heels into the mud, wrapping the other end of the rope around his waist and leaning back, his muscles screaming in protest. He was an anchor made of skin and bone against the full, merciless power of the river. The current fought him, trying to rip the rope from his hands, trying to pull the woman under. He could feel the rope slip, burning his palms. He gritted his teeth, a low growl escaping his lips. He would not let go. He would not. Slowly, painstakingly, he began to walk backward, pulling her hand over hand, his feet sinking deeper into the soft earth. The woman, now holding on with both hands, started to kick weakly, trying to help. Inch by agonizing inch, he dragged her out of the main current and toward the relative calm of the shallows. When her feet finally touched the muddy bottom, she collapsed, and Finn fell backward, landing hard in the muck, the rope still clutched in his raw hands. He lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, his chest on fire. The woman crawled the last few feet onto the bank, where she lay shivering and sobbing, her hands protectively clutching her swollen belly. She was pregnant. The realization hit Finn with the force of a physical blow. He had saved 2 lives. He staggered to his feet and went to her side. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and overwhelming gratitude. Water streamed from her soaked brown hair, and her lips were blue. "My baby," she choked out. "My husband, you have to call my husband." Before Finn could answer, a new sound cut through the storm. It wasn't the distant hum of traffic or the wail of a far-off siren. It was a deep, guttural rumble, a sound like thunder rolling low to the ground. It grew louder, closer, a chorus of angry engines. Headlights pierced the gloom, and a line of motorcycles crested the small hill overlooking the riverbank. They were huge, gleaming machines of chrome and black steel, and the men who rode them were just as intimidating. They wore leather vests, cutoffs emblazoned with a terrifying winged skull. Hell's Angels. The lead rider, a mountain of a man with a thick black beard and eyes that seemed to burn with cold fire, killed his engine. The sudden silence was more menacing than the noise. He swung a leg over his bike and stalked toward the riverbank, his heavy boots sinking into the mud. His gaze swept over the scene. The submerged car's location, the woman on the ground, and finally, the skinny, shivering boy standing over her. The man's face, already a hard mask of concern, tightened into something unreadable as he took in the sight of his pregnant wife, soaked and terrified, being tended to by a homeless kid. He knelt beside her, his large, tattooed hands surprisingly gentle as he checked her for injuries. "Amelia," he growled, his voice a low vibration of raw emotion. "Are you hurt? The baby?" "I'm okay, Rook," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We're okay. The car just went. But this boy, he saved us." Rook, the president of the Black Skulls Charter, slowly lifted his gaze from his wife to Finn. The boy flinched, expecting anger, suspicion, anything but the profound, unnerving stillness in the man's eyes. The other bikers had dismounted, forming a silent, imposing semicircle behind their leader. They were Titans clad in leather, their faces carved from granite, their patches marking them as men who lived by a different code. One of them, a bear of a man with a wild red beard, stepped forward. "President," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Ambulance is 5 minutes out." Rook didn't look away from Finn. He saw the boy's raw, bleeding hands, the cheap, torn sneakers, the hollow fear in his eyes. He saw the discarded rope. He saw the hero who didn't even have a roof over his head. The cold fire in his eyes flickered, replaced by something complex and deep. "What's your name, kid?" Rook asked, his voice softer now, but no less powerful. "Finn," the boy stammered, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. Rook nodded slowly. He reached out and placed a hand on Finn's shoulder. The boy expected it to be heavy, crushing, but it was firm and steady, a surprising anchor in the swirling chaos of the moment. "Finn," Rook said, his voice resonating with an authority that seemed to calm the storm itself. "You're not going to be cold for much longer." The flashing lights of the ambulance appeared over the hill, painting the grim scene in strobing blues and reds. The paramedics rushed down the embankment with a stretcher, their professional urgency a stark contrast to the bikers' watchful stillness. Rook never left Amelia's side, murmuring to her in a low, soothing tone as they checked her vitals and carefully secured her for transport. He held her hand, his massive frame a protective shield around her. But his eyes kept finding Finn. The boy stood off to the side, awkward and shivering, feeling more invisible than ever now that the professionals had arrived. He had done his part. Now it was time to disappear back into the shadows. That was the rule of the street. Help, but don't get caught. He started to inch backward, toward the familiar darkness of the pier. "Grizz," Rook said without turning his head. The red-bearded biker, who had been directing the paramedics with surprising efficiency, grunted in acknowledgement. "Don't let the kid leave." Grizz turned his massive head and pinned Finn with a look that was not unkind, but left no room for argument. "You heard the man," he rumbled. "Stick around." Finn froze, his escape route cut off by a wall of leather and muscle. Fear, cold and familiar, coiled in his stomach. Maybe this wasn't a rescue. Maybe it was a trade. He had saved the woman, and now they owned him. That's how things worked in the parts of the city he knew. Nothing was ever free. As the paramedics loaded Amelia into the ambulance, she lifted her head from the stretcher. "Wait," she called out, her voice weak but clear. "Finn, thank you." Her eyes, a warm hazel, locked with his, and in them he saw no pity, only a deep, genuine gratitude that warmed him more than any blanket ever could. Rook leaned in and kissed her forehead. "I'll meet you at the hospital. I have to take care of something first." He watched the ambulance pull away, its siren wailing into the night, before turning his full attention back to the boy. He walked over to Finn, his boots squelching in the mud. The other bikers closed in, a silent, menacing pack. Finn felt his breath catch in his throat. He was surrounded. Rook stopped directly in front of him, close enough that Finn had to crane his neck to look up at the man's face. The biker's leather vest smelled of rain, engine oil, and something else, an undeniable aura of power. "You saved my wife," Rook said, his voice flat, emotionless. "You saved my unborn child. You saved my entire world. And you did it with nothing but a rotten piece of rope and more guts than I've seen in a man twice your age." He paused, his dark eyes scanning Finn from head to toe, taking in the soaked clothes, the skinny frame, the dirt smudged on his cheek. "Where are your parents, kid?" Finn swallowed hard, the lump in his throat feeling like a stone. "Don't have any," he mumbled, staring at the mud on Rook's boots. "Where do you live?" Finn gestured vaguely with his head toward the derelict pier. "Here." A heavy silence fell over the group. The bikers exchanged glances, their hard faces shifting with expressions Finn couldn't decipher. Grizz let out a low whistle. Rook's jaw tightened, a muscle flexing in his cheek. He had seen kids like Finn before, chewed up and spit out by the system, left to fend for themselves in a world that didn't care. He had a younger brother, Liam, who had run away from a broken home. Rook, already deep in the club life, had tried to find him, but he was always one step behind. By the time he located him, it was too late. Liam was just another statistic, another ghost haunting the city's alleyways. Looking at Finn, Rook felt the old, jagged wound in his soul tear open. He saw the same fierce independence, the same haunted eyes. He saw a second chance. "No," Rook said, the word a final, irrevocable judgment. "You don't live here anymore." He shrugged off his own leather cut, the heavy vest bearing the club's colors and his rank as president. He draped it over Finn's narrow shoulders. It was ridiculously large, swallowing the boy's small frame, and impossibly heavy, weighted down with the legacy and brotherhood of the club. But it was warm, warmer than anything Finn had ever felt. The inner lining was soft flannel, and it smelled of Rook, a scent of safety and strength that chased away some of the bone-deep chill. "You're coming with us," Rook declared. It wasn't a question or an invitation. It was a command. "Grizz, put him on your bike. Take him back to the clubhouse. Get him a hot shower, some food, and dry clothes. Don't let him out of your sight." Grizz nodded, a flicker of a smile touching his lips beneath the thick beard. He gently guided Finn toward his massive Harley. "Small, kid. Let's go home." The word was so foreign to Finn, it sounded like a word from another language. He had no memory of a home, only a series of temporary shelters, foster houses, and, for the last year, the cold, hard ground. He looked back at Rook, who was now staring out at the dark, churning river, his face a mask of grim contemplation. For the first time, Finn wasn't scared of the giant biker. He was in awe of him. Grizz helped him onto the back of the bike, the leather seat cold against his wet jeans. "Hold on tight," the big man instructed, and then the engine roared to life, a thunderous beast waking from its slumber. The convoy of motorcycles turned and rumbled away from the river, their headlights cutting a path through the rainy darkness. As they rode, the wind whipped at Finn's face, but under the heavy leather vest, a strange, unfamiliar warmth began to spread through his chest. It wasn't just the flannel lining. It was something else, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. The ride to the clubhouse was a blur of rain-slicked asphalt and roaring engines. Finn held on to Grizz, burying his face in the biker's broad back, the vibration of the Harley humming through his entire body. They left the industrial wasteland behind, moving through the sleeping city suburbs and into a warehouse district. They finally pulled into a large, fenced-in compound dominated by a windowless brick building. A single, heavy steel door was the only visible entrance. The place looked more like a fortress than a home. As the engines died one by one, the silence that followed was thick with anticipation. Grizz helped a stiff and trembling Finn off the bike. The steel door creaked open, spilling warm, yellow light and a wave of sound. Loud rock music, gruff laughter, and the clinking of glasses. The inside of the Hell's Angels clubhouse was overwhelming. The main room was vast, with a long, polished wooden bar running along one wall, a pool table in the center, and clusters of worn leather couches and chairs scattered about. The air was thick with the smells of stale beer, cigarette smoke, and frying onions. Every wall was covered in memorabilia, framed photos of past and present members, old motorcycle parts mounted like trophies, and, dominating the back wall, a massive, hand-painted mural of the club's winged skull insignia. The dozen or so bikers who had been inside all turned as Rook's men entered. Their conversations died down, and their eyes, hard and curious, all landed on the small, dripping figure of Finn, who was dwarfed by Grizz's presence and swallowed by Rook's vest. A tense silence descended. A wiry biker with a shaved head and a tattoo of spiderweb on his neck stepped forward. "What's this, Grizz? You pick up a stray?" His tone was mocking, but his eyes were sharp and suspicious. Grizz shot him a glare that could have melted steel. "This is Finn. He just pulled the president's old lady out of the river. Show some respect, Skinner." A murmur went through the room. The biker's expressions shifted from suspicion to a mixture of shock and grudging respect. They all knew Amelia was Rook's world. The man who had saved her was, by extension, under the club's protection. Rook entered last, shutting the heavy door behind him with a definitive thud. He scanned the room, his presence instantly commanding the full attention of every man there. "Finn stays," he announced, his voice echoing in the suddenly quiet hall. "He's with us now. He gets a room, food, and our protection. Anyone has a problem with that, they talk to me. No one spoke." The unspoken challenge hung in the air for a moment before dissipating. Rook's word was law. He walked over to the bar and grabbed a clean towel, tossing it to Grizz. "Get him cleaned up. Find him some clothes that fit. I'm going to the hospital." He paused and looked at Finn, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "You did a good thing tonight, kid. A real good thing. We don't forget things like that." With that, he turned and left, the door closing behind him with the same finality as before. Grizz draped the towel over Finn's head and started to roughly dry his hair. "All right, shrimp. Let's get you sorted." He led Finn through the main room, past the staring bikers, and down a hallway lined with closed doors. He opened one at the end, revealing a small, Spartan room with a single bed, a dresser, and a small, barred window high up on the wall. "This was Hopper's room before he moved out," Grizz explained. "It's yours now. Bathroom's next door. Go take a hot shower. I'll find you some clothes." Finn stood in the middle of the small room, dripping onto the concrete floor. A room. A bed. It was more than he had dared to dream of for over a year. He felt a dizzying wave of disbelief wash over him. He took the hottest shower of his life, scrubbing away the grime of the river and the streets until his skin was raw and red. He let the steaming water run over him, trying to wash away the memories of cold nights and gnawing hunger. When he emerged, wrapped in a large towel, he found a set of clothes folded neatly on the bed. A black t-shirt with the club's logo on it, a pair of jeans that looked like they might actually fit, clean socks, and underwear. He dressed quickly, the soft cotton of the shirt a luxury against his skin. When he walked back out into the main hall, the atmosphere had changed. The jukebox was playing a slow, bluesy rock song. A few bikers were playing pool, the sharp crack of the balls punctuating the low murmur of conversation. A plate of food was waiting for him at the bar, a massive cheeseburger, a mountain of fries, and a tall glass of milk. Finn hadn't seen so much food in one place since his mother was alive. He sat down and began to eat, his hunger so profound it was painful. He ate ravenously, barely tasting it, his sole focus on getting the food from the plate into his stomach. Grizz sat on the stool next to him, nursing a beer and watching him with a thoughtful expression. "Slow down, kid," he said gently. "Nobody's going to take it from you." Finn forced himself to take a smaller bite. He looked around the room, at the hard-faced men who were now his guardians. They were loud, rough, and intimidating, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like prey. He was in a lion's den, but for once, the lions were on his side. He was safe. The thought was so powerful, so overwhelming, that his eyes welled up with tears. He ducked his head, ashamed, and scrubbed at his eyes with the back of his hand. Grizz placed a heavy hand on his shoulder, the same way Rook had. "It's all right, son," the big biker rumbled. "You're home." The word echoed in the cavernous room, a promise whispered against the backdrop of roaring engines and broken lives. For Finn, it was the beginning of everything. Over the next few days, Finn lived in a state of suspended disbelief. He slept in a real bed, warm and safe under a thick wool blanket. He ate 3 meals a day, hearty, hot food cooked by a rotating roster of bikers who were surprisingly skilled in the clubhouse kitchen. He explored his new home, a labyrinth of hallways, storage rooms, and a massive garage filled with motorcycles in various states of assembly. The garage became his sanctuary. It smelled of gasoline and metal, a clean, sharp scent that cleared his head. It was Grizz's domain, and the big biker seemed to enjoy the boy's quiet company. He started giving Finn small tasks, cleaning tools, sorting bolts, polishing chrome. Finn applied himself to the work with a fierce determination, his small hands surprisingly deft. He learned the names of the tools, the parts of an engine, the unique growl of each bike. He was a quick study, soaking up knowledge like a dry sponge. While he worked, Grizz would talk, telling stories about the club, about Rook, about the meaning of the patch on his back. "This ain't just a gang, kid," Grizz explained one afternoon, wiping grease from his hand with a rag. "It's a brotherhood. We look out for our own, no matter what. Rook, he takes that more seriously than anyone. Especially after what happened with his brother, Liam." Grizz's voice grew quiet. "They had a rough go of it as kids. Rook found a club, and it saved him. Liam, he went the other way, got lost to the streets. Rook tried to pull him back, but it was too late. He carries that every single day. When he saw you, I think he saw a chance to do right by Liam. To save the kid he couldn't save back then." The story settled heavily in Finn's chest. He understood now the intensity in Rook's eyes, the weight behind his words. He wasn't just a charity case. He was a mission, a form of redemption. Rook and Amelia returned from the hospital 2 days after the accident. The doctors had kept her for observation, but both she and the baby were perfectly healthy. When Amelia saw Finn, her face broke into a warm, radiant smile. She pulled him into a gentle hug, her pregnant belly pressing against him. "There's the hero," she said softly, her hand stroking his hair. "We can never thank you enough." Finn, unaccustomed to such open affection, stiffened for a moment before relaxing into her embrace. It felt nice, safe. Amelia became a quiet, steadying presence in the chaotic clubhouse. She treated Finn not as a project, but as a person. She asked him about his life, not with pity, but with genuine interest. She learned he loved to read, and started bringing him books from the library. Finn found himself opening up to her in a way he never had with anyone else. He told her about his mother, who had died of an illness 2 years ago, and about the series of foster homes that followed, each one worse than the last, until he finally ran away, choosing the harsh freedom of the streets over the structured misery of the system. But he never talked about Silas. The memory of Silas was a cold, hard knot of fear in his gut. Silas was the unofficial king of the city's homeless youth, a charismatic but cruel teenager a few years older than Finn. He ran a small, vicious gang that preyed on the weakest, stealing what little they had, demanding a tax for sleeping in certain territories. Finn had been one of his favorite targets. He was small, quiet, and alone, the perfect victim. Silas and his crew had taken his food, his blankets, and the last photo he had of his mother, laughing as they tore it into pieces. The thought of them finding him here, in this sanctuary, was a terror that kept him awake at night. He tried to push the fear down, to believe he was truly safe, but the shadows of his past were long. One afternoon, Grizz sent Finn to a small convenience store a few blocks away to pick up some oil filters. It was the first time he had left the compound alone. He clutched the $20 bill in his pocket, a nervous energy thrumming through him. The sun felt strange on his skin after days spent inside the dim clubhouse. As he was leaving the store, a familiar voice sent a jolt of ice through his veins. Well, look what crawled out from under a rock. Finn turned slowly. Silas was leaning against the wall of the store, flanked by two of his cronies. He was taller than Finn remembered, with a wiry strength and cold, predatory eyes. A cruel smirk played on his lips. Heard you fell in with some new friends, Finny, Silas sneered, stepping forward to block Finn's path. Big, tough biker boys. You think they make you tough? Finn's heart pounded in his chest. He tried to push past, but Silas grabbed his arm, his fingers digging him like talons. Where do you think you're going? You owe me. You've been off the grid for weeks. The interest has been piling up. I don't have anything, Finn said, his voice barely a whisper. Silas laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Oh, I think you do. Your new friends have lots of nice things. Shiny bikes, lots of cash. I think it's time you started paying your dues again. And this time, you'll be paying for our protection, too. He shoved Finn against the wall, the back of his head cracking against the brick. You're going to be our man on the inside. You're going to tell us when they're gone, what their schedules are. You're going to let us know when that clubhouse is ripe for the picking. Finn stared at him, horrified. Betray Rook? Grizz? Amelia? The people who had saved him? Never. No, he said, the word small but firm. Silas's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of rage. He drew back his fist. Wrong answer. Before the punch could land, the deep rumble of a Harley echoed down the street. All three boys froze. A single motorcycle, Rook's custom chopper, turned the corner and idled to a stop a few feet away. Rook sat on his bike, not moving, just watching them. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His presence was a physical force, radiating pure menace. Silas's bravado evaporated instantly. He let go of Finn's arm as if it were red hot. We were just talking, he stammered, taking a step back. Rook slowly dismounted, his boots hitting the pavement with quiet thuds. He walked toward them, his eyes locked on Silas. Looked like more than talking to me, Rook said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He stopped in front of Silas, towering over the wiry teenager. This boy is with me. He's with my club. That means he's off limits. To you, to your little friends, to everyone. Do you understand me? Silas nodded frantically, his eyes wide with fear. Yeah, man, I understand. We're cool, no, Rook said, leaning in closer, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. We're not cool. I ever see you or your crew within 100 yards of him again, I will personally introduce you to a world of pain you can't even imagine. Now get out of my sight. Silas and his friends scrambled away, practically tripping over each other in their haste to escape. They disappeared around the corner, leaving only the sound of Rook's idling engine in their wake. Rook turned to Finn, his expression unreadable. You okay? Finn could only nod, his throat too tight to speak. He was shaking, not from fear of Silas anymore, but from the terrifying, awe-inspiring display of power he had just witnessed. Rook picked up the bag with the oil filters that Finn had dropped. "Let's go home," he said, and for the second time, the word resonated deep in Finn's soul, not as a place, but as a promise of absolute, unwavering protection. The walk back to the clubhouse was silent. Finn walked beside Rook, matching his long strides as best he could, the biker's massive frame a comforting shadow next to him. When they stepped back inside the compound, Rook finally spoke. "You should have told me about them." His voice wasn't angry, but there was a hard edge of disappointment to it. Finn stared at the ground. "I didn't want to cause trouble, kid," Rook said, stopping and turning to face him. He crouched down, bringing himself to Finn's eye level. "You're not trouble. You're family. Family tells each other when there's a problem, so we can face it together. What that scum said to you about being our man on the inside." Finn nodded, his shame a hot flush on his cheeks. "Would you ever do that? Betray us?" Rook asked, his gaze intense, searching. "No." The word burst out of Finn, full of conviction. "Never." A slow smile spread across Rook's face, transforming his hard features. "I know," he said. "I knew at the moment I saw you by that river." He stood up and clapped a hand on Finn's shoulder. "But Silas and his kind, they're like rats. You chase one off, more come back. They're not just a threat to you anymore. They're a threat to the club. And we don't tolerate threats." That evening, Rook called a church meeting, a mandatory assembly of all patch members. Finn was allowed to sit in a corner, out of the way, listening. The mood in the room was sober, serious. Rook stood before his men, his presence filling the room. "The boy, Finn," he began, his voice ringing with authority. "He has an enemy, a street parasite named Silas who thinks he can use our connection to the kid as leverage. He threatened the boy today. He tried to turn him against us, to make him a spy in our house." A low growl rumbled through the assembled bikers. Their code was simple but absolute. An attack on one is an attack on all. And Finn, though not a member, was now one of them. "This isn't just about the kid anymore," Rook continued, his eyes sweeping over his brothers. "This is about respect. It's about sending a message. No one touches our family. No one threatens our home. This punk and his crew, they've made a mistake. They've woken the dragon. We're going to find them, and we're going to remove them. Permanently." Grizz stood up. "What's the plan, Prez?" "Reconnaissance first," Rook ordered. "Skinner, you and your crew know the street rats better than anyone. Find out where Silas holes up. I want to know his numbers, his routines, his weaknesses. I want to know everything. We don't go in half-cocked. We go in smart, and we go in hard. We end this tonight." A grim sense of purpose settled over the clubhouse. The bikers moved with quiet efficiency, cleaning weapons, checking their bikes, preparing for war. Finn watched, a knot of fear and awe tightening in his stomach. This was all because of him. He felt a surge of guilt, but it was quickly replaced by something else, a fierce, protective loyalty. These men were willing to go to war for him. He had to do something to help. He approached Grizz, who was loading a shotgun with heavy slugs. "I know where they might be," Finn said, his voice quiet but steady. Grizz stopped what he was doing and looked at him. "There's an old abandoned cannery down by the docks. It's where Silas holds court. It's big, full of places to hide. They feel safe there." Grizz nodded, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "Good work, kid. That's a start." He relayed the information to Rook, who listened intently, his mind working like a battlefield general's. "A cannery," Rook mused. "Lots of entrances, lots of exits. A fortress of rust. It's a perfect place for an ambush." He unrolled a set of old city blueprints on the pool table. The bikers gathered around, their tattooed hands tracing the layout of the derelict building. "They'll be expecting a full frontal assault," Rook said, pointing to the main entrance. "They'll have it barricaded. We're not going to give it to them. We'll split into 3 teams. Alpha team, led by me, will create a diversion here at the front. Make a lot of noise. Draw them out." He looked at Grizz. "Bravo team, you'll take 5 men and enter through the old loading bays on the west side. Quietly. You'll be our hammer." He then pointed to Skinner. "Charlie team, you'll take the roof. Rappel down through the skylights if you have to. You'll be the anvil. We'll crush them between us. The plan was simple, brutal, and elegant. As the bikers prepared to roll out, Rook pulled Finn aside. You're staying here, he said firmly. With Amelia. You've done your part, but I can help, Finn insisted. I know the layout. I know their faces. Rook considered him for a moment. He saw the fire in the boy's eyes, the desperate need to belong, to contribute. He remembered Liam, who had always wanted to prove himself. All right, he conceded. You're not fighting. You're not even going inside. You'll ride with me. You'll be my eyes. You point out Silas to me. That's it. Then you get back to the perimeter and you stay there. Understood. Finn nodded eagerly, his heart soaring. He wasn't being left behind. He was part of the operation. The convoy of Harleys rolled out of the compound under the cloak of darkness, their engines a low, menacing growl that promised retribution. They moved through the city like a pack of wolves, silent and deadly. When they reached the derelict cannery, a hulking skeleton of rusted steel and broken windows, they cut their engines, plunging the area into an eerie silence. Rook, with Finn on the back of his bike, circled the building once, staying in the shadows. Finn pointed to a flicker of light in a second-story window. That's their main room, he whispered. Silas will be there. Rook nodded. Go, he said to Grizz and Skinner, and their teams melted into the darkness, silent wraiths moving toward their designated entry points. Rook and his team waited. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Finn's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Finally, Rook gave a signal. Alpha Team started their engines, the sudden, deafening roar shattering the night. They revved their engines, their headlights cutting through the darkness, pinning the front of the cannery in a brilliant glare. Shouts erupted from inside the building. Figures appeared in the broken windows, silhouetted against the light. Rook gave a war cry, and his team charged forward, not toward the building, but circling in front of it, a maelstrom of noise and light. It was the perfect diversion. As Silas and his crew focused on the chaos outside, they didn't hear the silent entry of Bravo Team through the loading bays. They didn't see the dark figures of Charlie Team descending from the ceiling like spiders. The attack was swift and overwhelming. The bikers moved with disciplined violence, a whirlwind of black leather and righteous fury. It wasn't a fight. It was a dismantling. They were professionals dealing with amateurs. Silas, realizing he'd been tricked, tried to flee. He scrambled out a side door, straight into the path of Rook, who had been waiting for him. The biker dismounted his chopper and stood there, an immovable object. Silas skidded to a halt, his face pale with terror. Please, he whimpered. Don't. Rook didn't say a word. He simply pointed back toward the cannery, where the sounds of his brothers restoring order were echoing through the night. The message was clear. There was no escape. The fight was over in less than 10 minutes. Silas and his gang were rounded up, bruised, battered, and thoroughly broken. They were stripped of their weapons and valuables, which the bikers would later anonymously donate to a local shelter. Rook stood over a defeated Silas, who was huddled on the ground. This city is our city, Rook said, his voice cold as the grave. The people you prey on, the weak, the forgotten, they are under our protection now. You and your kind are no longer welcome here. You have until sunrise to disappear. If we ever see you again, we won't be this merciful. He turned his back on the pathetic crew and walked back to his bike, where Finn was waiting, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. Rook swung his leg over the seat. It's over, he said. Let's go home. The ride back was different. The engines seemed to sing a triumphant song. The bikers rode in tight formation, a unified force, their victory a palpable energy in the cool night air. Back at the clubhouse, the atmosphere was electric. The men were celebrating not just the victory, but the reaffirmation of their purpose. They were more than a motorcycle club. They were a shield for the defenseless. Amelia was waiting up, her face etched with worry, which melted into relief when she saw them all return safely. She hugged Rook tightly, then turned her warm smile on Finn. I was so worried, she said, her hand resting on his cheek. I'm glad you're safe. Later that night, when the celebration had quieted down to a low hum, Rook found Finn in the garage, polishing the chrome on Grizz's bike with a soft cloth. "You did good tonight, kid," Rook said, leaning against the doorframe. "You were brave. You were all brave," Finn replied, not looking up from his work. "You did that for me. We did it for us," Rook corrected him. "You're part of this family now, Finn. Your enemies are our enemies. Your fight is our fight." He walked over and held out his hand. In his palm was a small, silver pendant, a finely detailed replica of the club's winged skull insignia, hanging on a leather cord. "You're not old enough for a patch," Rook said, "and a patch has to be earned through years of prospecting. But this is a symbol. It means you are under the protection of this charter. It means you are one of us. It means you are never, ever alone again." Finn stared at the pendant, his vision blurring with tears. He reached out with a trembling hand and took it. The metal was cool and heavy in his palm. Rook took the cord and fastened it around Finn's neck. It settled against his chest, a comforting weight. "Welcome to the family, son," Rook said, his voice thick with emotion. Finn looked up at the towering man who had become his protector, his mentor, his father figure. He couldn't find the words to express the overwhelming gratitude and sense of belonging that filled his heart, so he simply said the two words that meant everything. "Thank you." Months melted into a year. The seasons turned, and Finn grew, not just in height, but in confidence. The hollows in his cheeks filled out, and the haunted look in his eyes was replaced by a steady, quiet strength. He became an indispensable part of the clubhouse. He was the best mechanic's apprentice Grizz had ever had, with an intuitive understanding of engines. He helped manage the bar, kept the clubhouse clean, and ran errands for his biker family, all while devouring every book Amelia brought him. He was a strange and wonderful contradiction, a quiet, studious boy with a Hell's Angels pendant hanging around his neck. The day Amelia went into labor, the entire clubhouse went on high alert. The usual gruff chaos was replaced by a tense, nervous energy. Grizz paced the garage like a caged bear. Skinner, the tough-as-nails biker, was actually polishing the bar until it gleamed. Rook was a wreck, his usual iron control completely gone, replaced by the terrified excitement of a first-time father. Finn was the calm in the storm. He made sure Rook had the hospital bag, that the bike was gassed up, and that Amelia was comfortable. He was the last one they saw as they left for the hospital, giving Rook a steady, reassuring nod. "It'll be okay," he said, with a certainty that belied his age. He was right. A few hours later, Rook called. His voice, usually a low growl, was cracked with pure, unadulterated joy. "It's a boy," he announced. "A healthy baby boy. We're naming him Liam." A cheer erupted through the clubhouse. The bikers celebrated with a fervor that shook the very foundations of the building. They had a new member of the family. When Rook and Amelia brought baby Liam home, the first person they introduced him to was Finn. Amelia placed the tiny, sleeping bundle in Finn's arms. He held the baby with a surprising gentleness, his gaze full of wonder and a fierce, protective love. He looked up at Rook and Amelia, his eyes shining. "He's perfect," he whispered. One sunny afternoon, a few weeks later, Finn was standing out in the compound with Rook and Grizz. The sun glinted off the long line of polished Harleys, chrome and steel gleaming like the armor of modern-day knights. Baby Liam was asleep in a carrier strapped to Rook's chest, his tiny face peaceful. Rook looked at Finn, who was no longer the scrawny, terrified boy he had found by the river. He was a young man, strong and sure of himself, with a home and a future. "You know," Rook said, his voice filled with a quiet pride, "sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the one you're born into. We found you, kid, but in a lot of ways, you saved us too. You reminded us what this is all about." Finn looked at the winged skull on Rook's vest, then touched the matching pendant around his own neck. He wasn't a homeless boy anymore. He was the brother of giants, the ward of a king, the guardian of a prince. He had a brotherhood, forged not in blood, but in loyalty, honor, and the roaring thunder of a Harley-Davidson engine. He was home. The roar of a motorcycle can be a terrifying sound, but for some, it's the sound of salvation. The story of Finn is a testament to the fact that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes, They were leather. If you believe in the power of brotherhood and second chances, share this story. Comment below with your thoughts on these outlaw heroes. And let's continue to support survivors who find family in the most unexpected places.